You just keep doing that, John.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pour and Tell. I am Aaron Loomis, and with me today is the main hosts of Pour and Tell, John McTavish and June Liu. How you guys doing?
Doing well, man. We're in our element, cigars and whiskey. This is our second live show, third live show, I guess, technically.
Yes, third, yeah.
And we're digging it. I'm digging. I'm glad the weather's cooperating. You'd think that I would like the weather to be warm, but when we're drinking tonight, I kind of want it to be a little fresh, as they say over across the pond. That's perfect weather for me for what we're drinking tonight.
Great. And Seth is joining me as a kind of a secondary co-host on the show tonight. Welcome, Seth. And he's frozen up. A little too much booze for Seth already. All right, so today we are doing another special pairing edition. We have Jeff Borysiewicz from Corona Cigar and Florida Sungrown. Jeff, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, and sorry about being late.
Not a problem at all. And our featured spirit this evening is from Laphroaig, and from Laphroaig we have Simon Brooking. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks. Great to be here. Can I sing myself in here?
Go for it.
Okay. And it's westering home with a song in the air, light in the eye, and it's goodbye to care. Laughter and love and a welcoming there. I love my heart, my own one. Where are the folks like the folks of the West? Donald and Bessie at Laphroaig are the best. There I will hie me and there I will rest, at home with thy own folk on Isla. I like to sing, I like to drink scotch, and to quote George Burns, most folks would rather listen to me drink scotch.
There you go.
That was
Fantastic.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, I get it. You're in New York because you want to be on Broadway.
The lights.
That's good.
So the goal of the show is pairing. So we are pairing Laphroaig with Florida Sungrown, various expressions of each. So we're going to kind of get into it. Simon, I think what we'd like to do is start out with you. Can you give a brief history of Laphroaig?
Absolutely. We are a tiny little distillery off the southwest coast of Scotland. We are, and I'll bring this up here, we are located right on the, We are located in the, on the bay. The Laphroaig means the hollow by the bay. The island of Islay has got 9 distilleries. 8 of those distilleries are located right on the sea, because when the farmers were first producing their whiskey, they would have extra grain at the end of the season. It was more profitable, more economical for them to make a whiskey out of it rather than to lose it to the mold of the mildew of the cold, damp winter months. Plus, they never have a commodity to sell at market, and also a nice whiskey to keep them warm those long, cold winter months. So by the late 18th century, there were almost 2,000 distilleries all over Scotland. So there's a country to the south of us, which will remain nameless, that decided they wanted to cash in on that action. So they legalized whiskey production, and that was the Excise Act of 1823. But at that point, most of these distilleries are located along the waterways, because the waterways were the highways of the day. That was the easiest way to move around, and so that's why this little island stuck out in the middle of the Atlantic was more centrally located, because it was easier to move around by the sea than it was to travel over land and over the mountains. The Johnson brothers, who started this distillery back in established 1815, they would sail back to the mainland. It would take them the day, and then it would take them another week to get over the mountains to Glasgow. So that's why the distilleries are where they are, and they're located right along the shoreline, so that the ships could come in, bring the grain in, and then take the whiskey out. Continue to grow in popularity, but most of the whiskey was being used for blending purposes in the 19th century. And it really wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century when single malt came into fashion. Prior to that, it was really used primarily for blending purposes, but the blends can't make their whiskey without us providing them those flavors. And Laphroaig gives those foundational notes, those smoky whiskey notes that you can find from the peat bogs, where we dry our barley over the peat fires. and I'll show you the peat here. So those are the peat bogs that we use to dry the barley. So that smoky quality comes from the peat, which is basically young coal that we use to dry the barley over the peat fires. And it marries beautifully when you then distill it and then into oak barrels. And then that's, I think, one of the reasons why it pairs so nicely with these cigars. Different flavors, of course, the smoke in varying degrees depending on the different types of barrels that we use, whether they're bourbon barrels or whether it is sherry casks. Predominantly sherry casks are what we were used in the 19th century.
Very nice. So Jeff, how did you and Simon kind of hook up?
So when we started selling liquor in our downtown Orlando store, again, we were one of the few establishments that paid attention to Scotch whiskey and actually bourbon as well. Most of the stuff back in the mid 2000s, like that's in bars, were all focusing on flavored vodka. So, Simon, you've been with Laphroaig for quite some time, because you did events in our store going back 12 years ago. So I just think Simon's one of the best at explaining the whole process, and also how long have you been with Laphroaig?
Going on 13 years now.
Yeah. So when Simon first came up and did his first, what I wanted to share today with everybody that's watching this is sort of like what we would do at Corona Cigar when we would do these cigar and whiskey pairings, these educational seminars. We call them Whiskey 101s. So I asked Simon if he would come on this show, and let's kind of do that with people, with the social distancing and all that other good stuff. By the way, our bars are kind of sort of open. I mean, they're if you're strictly a bar, you're not open, but because we have less than 50% of our revenues from liquor, we can actually still serve some. But anyway, I wanted to do it because no one's been able to, do these kind of seminars and whiskey tastings in the bar. So let's do it virtually. And, we had George Grant, and, we had Balvenie, Glenn Fiddick, and Glenn Farkas on here a few weeks ago. And Scotland is such a unique country with their single malt whiskeys that they're totally different. And in my opinion, you take a Speyside malt and it's one flavor profile, and when we go to the island of Islay, we're at the exact opposite flavor profile. These things are heavy, they're smoky, and Simon will share with us today of why that happens, what makes their whiskeys different. And, we're going to pair them with nice FSG cigars. I'm smoking an American tonight, and I will, when this is finished, I'll be smoking my FSG Bellicoso. So I got both of them ready to go. And we'll be pairing with lots of different whiskey. I know you guys have both your Laphroaigs there.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a little bit of a selection here, and I'm starting with a Laphroaig 16. So
nice.
Simon can tell us some of the differences between these. I'm eventually going to work up to this one. I normally, listen, I'll be honest with you, this is not from my personal bar. This is a 32-year. When our downtown store has been closed, the guys packed up a lot of our old rare whiskeys, and there's probably $500,000 worth of single malt Scotch sitting here in my house right now. Some very rare stuff that we just didn't want to keep.
What's your address, Jeff?
Yeah, well, just for curiosity, what's your address?
Yeah, I posted something on Instagram the other day. It was a Macallan 63. We've also got a Macallan 55, and people are pretty shocked to see that a bottle of Macallan 63 on the market right now is $40,000, and Macallan 55 is going for about $100,000. So yeah, there's some of these stuff gets crazy priced.
Very nice.
It is what it is.
So John, did you want to get into some of the questions that you had brought up here?
Yeah, I have a ton of questions. I'm going to start with a softball question, because of course the malting of the barley, the getting the peat in the barley is predominantly where you're getting that smoke from. I know in the past Laphroaig was doing floor maltings all on their own. Are they still doing floor malting, Simon?
Yes, we are. 20% of our barley comes from our floor maltings. We don't have a large enough malting facility to be able to malt for our total production, for global production. Now, with that said, 50 years ago, we would have had enough. But there was the demand has become so high. So we're using a combination of malted barley from Laphroaig as well as malted barley from the Port Ellen maltings, which is the industrial malting facility on the island that malts for all of the distilleries on the island. So we're using a combination of the two barleys. For those Laphroaig fans out there, we did do a bottling in 2015, a Carchus, and Jeff, you may still have a bottle at the store there. The 2015 bottling, John Campbell, our distillery manager, wanted to recreate a Laphroaig from the early 19th century, from when the Johnson brothers were making the whiskey. So in order to do that, he did 100% floor malted barley, distilled it in our small spirit stills, which date back to the early part of the 1800s. They're not the original stills, but the design dates back to that time. And then aged them in the #1 warehouse, which is our oldest warehouse, which dates back to the early years. So that was a project that John had to consider and lay out 12 years prior to the anniversary, 2015. So in 2003, he was doing this bottling, doing these maltings. So that it's a real interesting style, Laphroaig. It's got some real grassy notes. The same thing happened recently in this past year. We had our boiler broke down at the distillery, and we used the boiler to dry our barley after the peat fires. We used force blown air from the still houses, the residual heat from the still houses to dry the barley. But the boiler broke down, so the stills were running, so we didn't have any residual heat. So what we had to do is we Scots, we're thrifty. We're stingy. It's where copper wire came from, was two Scotsmen fighting over a penny. So we had laid out all this barley on the floors, and I'll pull up a photo of the barley there.
Sometimes the best things come out of necessity, not necessarily planning. So it's fun when that happens.
So you see, this is the barley. We're laying 7 tons out on each side of the pillars there. And so 14 ton for a whole floor. We laid this out, and it was growing. We're turning it. That's called a grubber. Our maltman there, Arthur, he's putting the grooves, turning the barley to aerate it, because if you let it just lay it out flat and let it grow, it's going to generate too much heat, and it's going to mold and mildew. And certainly you don't want that with tobacco leaf. You don't want it with barley as well. And so you put those grooves in, it creates airflow through on the malting floor. We have a very high-tech ventilation system. If it gets too warm, we open the window. But we laid out all this barley, and we had the peat fires all set. These peat fires all set and ready to go to dry it. But then there's a second step of the process, which is drying it over the force blown air from the residual heat. But we didn't have that, so we had to use anthracite coal, which is the way we would have done it 50, 60 years ago, to dry it over. It was a 2-step: coal, peat first, and then coal after that to dry it. And anthracite coal is a smokeless coal. And then we were able to dry it and then distill it after that. And it created a very old school style Laphroaig, which I guarantee you it will be a Cartus bottling in anywhere from 10 to 12 years from now. So you heard it here first.
Set your calendar reminders.
Yeah.
So Simon, quick question on that. You guys are still doing the Islay Festival?
Yeah, the Islay Festival has been canceled for this year. The islands they're very protective about the folks on the island. Elox is an islander in the Gaelic language. It's not Ewok, an Elok, but it is just for the safety of all of the folks on the island. We've canceled it. There are plans underfoot for us for some virtual festival open days. It's the 24th of May, so it's coming up through the 31st. And each day is a special open day. And Laphroaig is always on the Tuesday. And then Bowmore, our sister distillery, is on the Wednesday. So there will be some online virtual tastings that we'll be doing this year. But unfortunately, nobody can travel to the island this year.
So the reason I was asking that, Simon, is that usually for the festival, don't you guys release like a limited Laphroaig for the festival?
Yeah, we do. The cartridge bottling, yep, which we produce every year since 2008. We produce the cartridge bottling, and you guys at Corona have got a real nice selection, a yearly selection of it. It's a chance for us, John Campbell, our distillery manager, to be able to experiment with different casks. Some of them are a little more traditional, like that 2015. Some of them are a little more experimental. Our 2012 was a port cask, and it was incredibly well received. So much so that it's impossible to find that bottling anywhere anymore. And because of that, this year we are doing a port cask and then finished in a wine cask. That is the bottling, and that'll be coming to the U.S. shores probably sometime August, September. Just everything's been pushed back just with the challenges with shipping. But there will be a cartridge bottling. The other bottling that we release each year, generally around that time, is also the 10-year cask strength, which is this. This is the 19 bottling. This is batch number 11, and it's bottled at 58.6. So it's a big, bold, punch in the gut kind of Laphroaig. If you like that bigger, bolder style, even bigger. Are you kidding me? Folks are saying bolder than the 10-year. People want more. Yeah, I mean, you get people out there. I need peat, more peat.
Right. So the festival being pushed back a little bit is not going to affect the limited edition bottlings that you guys release for the festival.
No, because all of those casks have been laid down. Where it could be delayed is just in shipping.
So if we could, I want to back up a little bit because we made a couple quantum leaps here on some of this stuff that just for some of the people that aren't real familiar with single malt Scotch and the island of Islay in particular. So I just wanted to, do you know why, Simon, the island of Islay is called Islay? Because until I went there, it was perhaps the most confusing name of an island I've ever heard. It's like calling a lake, this is Lakey Lake.
Yeah, it's island. It means the island of Ireland.
The
Simple
island of
talk.
Ireland.
Don't beat around the bush. but it's
Very
a great
direct people.
Yeah, it's a great way
hell?
to remember the name of the island, because a lot of folks will say, is it Islay, is it Isla? Just remember, Isla means island. You got pronunciation of the region. Or Isla have another Laphroaig, which
Don't mind if I do.
so let's do that. Let's have a toast.
That's the strangest naming I've ever heard. We live on the island of Islay. And I never understood it. I guess there's no story behind that.
So here's the toast. I must go down to the sea today, to the lonely sea in the sky, and all I ask is an Isla cask and the friends to drink it dry.
Cheers.
Plunge.
Cheers. Some of these references and that you were talking about, especially earlier before we went live. What was that that you were saying, John and Simon? You guys knew the same. What was that? It's not a guild. It's a.
The Keepers of the Quake.
Yeah. So talking about that, this sounds probably really stupid, but it totally reminded me of watching Game of Thrones.
It's very much so. I mean, the Keepers of the Quake is this traditional organization that supports people who support the Scotch industry and recognizes. And Blair Athol and Blair Castle, it is this majestic, grandiose, beautiful castle in the Highlands with stag's heads from floor to ceiling in the grand room. And we all get piped in for the invocation. And by the end of the night, we're all standing on our chairs with our feet on the table, cheering to everybody. And it's a fantastic evening, and really, what better way to be inducted into a whiskey organization, but with all that pomp and circumstance and fanfare. The Scots know how to do it right.
Nice.
So, Simon, real quick, can you explain what a quake is? Because I never knew what one of those were until someone from Scotland gave me one, and I was like, this thing looks like an ashtray. And they're like, no, it's a quake. So tell us what that is.
Yeah, quake. It's spelled Q-U-A-I-C-H, and it's pronounced quake, like earthquake. And it's a welcoming cup. So what it is it's a two-handed welcoming cup. So when a stranger visits your cottage, you pour a dram of your local spirit, pour it into the welcoming cup, and you give it to the stranger. And the reason it's a two-handed cup is so that the stranger can't reach for his knife.
I have one of those. I had no idea what the heck it was. I was given one of those from my family. I had one. I had no idea what the hell it was. Now I know.
Seth, it looks like an ashtray. The two little handles. I'm like, is this like an ashtray?
To be honest with you, I think I probably even have used it as an ashtray before. So, I mean, my kids have played with it. Not anymore.
Yeah. So I never knew what it was. So thanks for sharing that story. Yeah. But, if you could also, Simon, back up real quick about single malt. We're going to get basic on that. One of the things that really makes Laphroaig different than others is basically every distillery on Islay is the fact that it's such a peated malt. And do you have a grain of malt with you that you can show, and then show us tell us what the malting process is, about the whole reason why you have to go through that process of malt.
There's the grain there. I mean, this is already malted barley, so we have to basically you have to fool the barley into growing, and so we'll soak it for 2 days. That starts the germination process, and then we lay it out on those malting floors that we showed you before. And by the end of the 6 days, it's got the consistency of sprouts. So it's they're called the acrospires. It's those little shoots, the little rootlets that will grow, and they should be about the length of the kernel of barley itself. And so if we were to let it continue to grow, it'll grow into a plant, and that won't do us any good, because what we want to capture are the sugars, and one of those sugars is maltase. So when we talk about malting barley, it's capturing the maltase sugars. So we'll shovel it into a chute that takes it into the kilns, and then from down below, we'll light the peat fires, and so you seeing the kilns there?
Yep.
Yeah. So the smoke's going to go up through the floor. The barley is now sitting a foot thick on a mesh screen floor above these kilns. And for the next 15 to 18 hours, it's going to dry the barley. We're going to dry it down to a 2% moisture content. And the boys, the malt men, they have a little trick that if they want to check to see if the barley is dry enough to be able to go into the next step of the process, they can take one of these kernels and on the floor, on the concrete floor, if they can write their name in the flour of the barley, then it is dry enough to be able to go into the next step of the process. We'll store it for 3 weeks completely to make sure that it's completely dormant. And then we're going to grind it into a fine grist. there are these big mills called Porteous mills. If you've ever been to a distiller, you'll see these big. They're red, and they're built so well that the Porteous company went out of business. But they'll grind it into 3 components. You've got grit, you've got flour, and you've got kernels. And they're going to use all of that in the mashing process because the kernels actually serve as a filter. Now, so you've got the flour, that's where you're getting your starches. Now, if you think about when you're drying over these kilns, what's the first layer of the barley that's going to absorb the smoke? It's that kernel, the husk.
The kernel, yeah.
The husk, right? So the husk, that's part of the filtration process. So basically when we make this beer, it's going to filter through, the wort is going to filter through these husks and pull a lot of that smoke. So we've got a liquid sugary substance that's called wort. And then we're going to add yeast and ferment. And basically at this point, we're making a beer. All single malt Scotch is a distilled beer without the hops. And so then this is where the difference between beer and whiskey begins. For whiskey, we're going to distill and then we're going to age, maturation. So those are the 2 additional steps. Although there is beer these days that are also maturing in casks as well. So the first step of the distillation, it goes into the stills that are at the far end of our still house here. The larger stills are the wash stills. It's hard to see in this photo, but there's a window halfway up the still on those far end, right end stills. It's called a sight glass. And so you've got this beer now in the boil ball. You heat it up, and what's the first thing it's going to do? It's going to foam. It's going to froth. So the boys are watching to see the foam hit those windows up the column, and then they'll turn it down, turn the temperature down. Distill it. We're going to distill it to about 25% alcohol. At this point, there's some nasty byproducts, some acetone, some acetates, which back in the day, you made a bad batch of whiskey, you ran the risk of going blind from drinking it. It's where the term blind drunk comes from. So needless to say, you need to distill those additional elements off. So we send it on to our spirit stills, which are the 4 that you see on the left. You've got the 3 wash stills, 4 spirit stills. And we distill up to 69 to 71% ABV. Now, what's unique for us at Laphroaig is you see that line arm, the L-shaped line arm coming off the top of the stills in the spirit stills. It's an ascending line arm versus a descending. So what that does is you get more copper contact. The condensate is going to roll back down into the boil ball, and it's going to distill off more of those heavier, oilier qualities. So there's a sweetness you get with Laphroaig that comes from that ascending line arm. From there, yes, go ahead.
So Simon, on those, is that Forsyth Coppersmiths that do your stills as well, right?
Yes, Forsyth pretty much does the majority of the industry. Yeah.
Yeah. So you also are a brand ambassador for Bowmore as well, correct?
Correct.
So just want to lay this out real quick. So on Islay, you said there's 7 distilleries, right? Nine distilleries.
And soon to be a 10th with Port Ellen reopening.
Very excited about the 10th reopening.
And perhaps an 11th, which is currently on the table.
And then, so in the center of town, which is where Bowmore is, was that the first? Is that the oldest in Islay?
Bowmore is the oldest. It's the name of the town. The town was started in the mid 1700s, and it made sense that it would be the perfect location to also start a distillery. So it was this David Simpson and his family who actually moved from another part of the island to move to Bowmore. Bowmore is the oldest licensed distillery on the island, 1779, the second oldest licensed distillery in Scotland. We have the oldest Scotch whiskey vaults at Bowmore, the #1 vaults, which again, as we were talking earlier on, are located on the sea, which produces some really interesting secondary and tertiary flavors and aromatics in these warehouses by the sea, which we can talk about when we get into some of the other whiskeys.
Well, Simon, let me kind of paint the picture of that smell, because I've had the pleasure of being there, and it's wonderful. But imagine wet rocks and the smell of sort of like salt and seaweed with a little bit of fish in the air. So that's kind of what that area smells like to me. So it obviously adds some flavor and characteristics to it, but it has a real sea type of smell. But where I was leading to with the Bowmore versus Laphroaig was back on the stills. It seems like a lot of you guys talk that the shape of your stills, even though you're using pretty much the exact same ingredients to make the whiskey, why it tastes different. Is your still shape and things like that? What do you attribute that difference of why you can get two different whiskeys from two different distilleries that are about 7 miles apart, if that?
Well, when you consider single malt Scotch is it's a saccharified and fermented cereal extract implemented by only the enzymes of malted barley. That's pretty technical, but it has to be distilled in Scotland, made out of pure malted barley, distilled in copper pot stills, aged in oak barrels for a minimum of 3 years, and bottled at no less than 40% ABV. So the standards are pretty straightforward, but where the variations come into play is size and shape of the still, fermentation times, mashing times, maturation location, even the warehouses, their microclimates at each distillery. And one of the key contributing factors, certainly Bowmore is located on a protected sea loch. Loch in Dal is the name of it. And that was the reason that they started the town there, because it was a protected harbor. It made sense for ships to anchor in Loch in Dal. So when you look at, and I'm going to pull up a map here. Hold on a second here. Yeah, here we go. Oh, wrong one. All right. Can you guys see? Can you guys see or no?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm pulling it up. Right. Current slide. Hold on. I gotta get to screen share. Sorry, guys.
No worries.
Come on, June.
There we go.
Coming.
There it is.
Okay, so here you see here you see the island of Islay with the nine distilleries, and Laphroaig, Lagavulin, and Ardbeg are located on the southern coast there, and actually, if we were to orient this map in the right orientation, we would rotate it to the right about 35 degrees, 40 degrees. So the southern part of the island where Laphroaig is, it really sticks out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and it bears the brunt of many of the storms that come across the Atlantic. Landfall for many of these storms are right along that coast. So that's why these three distilleries, Laphroaig, Lagavulin, and Ardbeg, tend to be heavier, because the climate, the microclimate on Islay varies within the island's only 30 miles by 35 miles across. It's not very large, but because Bowmore sits on Loch in Dal there, it is a little bit more protected. So it is not as heavily smoky, not as heavily peaty as the ones along the southern coast there. Plus, you saw the pictures of the kilns prior. We at Laphroaig dry the barley over the peat fires first, but we also let the fires die down first, and then we pack peat onto it again, and it smolders. It's what we call cold smoke peat. Bowmore uses the heat of the fire. So, and I'll backtrack just a little bit. Peat from the highlands of Scotland is more decomposed pine trees. Peat on the island of Islay is more decomposed seaweed. So it's like the difference between sitting around a campfire in the forest versus sitting around a bonfire on the beach. And as Jeff was talking about that maritime, that salt, that seaweed notes, you're getting more of that beach bonfire the Beaumont is that beach bonfire that night. Laphroaig is that beach bonfire the next morning. You're sprawled out on the beach next to the fire. It's probably just raining on it at this point. And that's the cold, wet smoke of Laphroaig versus the salty maritime smoke of Beaumont.
Because
So real
like
quick,
mainland has like the Caledonia forest, which is where the peat really is heavy, right, Simon?
Well, the Caledonian forest and up near the northeast part of Scotland is when you look at Scotland, the lochs, of course Loch Ness, these famous deeply cut lochs were cut by the glaciers as the glaciers receded. So you have what's called the Great Glens. And glen is a valley.
Yeah.
So these valleys have been cut by the glaciers as they receded, and the glaciers scraped off the top of Isla, and at one time Isla was below the sea level. When the sea levels receded, a lot of that vegetation on the island is seaweed. So
Yeah.
that's where the seaweed notes are coming from in our whiskeys.
And just a quick point of clarification for our audience who I think is going to be largely American. So 20.6 million liters is roughly 5.2 million Freedom gallons. And Laphroaig, 3.3 million liters of production is, I think, roughly 817,000 Freedom gallons. So,
John, I'm
Give you a
glad you
sense.
brought that up, because if you look, that's the part I'm going to try and put an analogy with cigars. Look, the Isle of Islay to me reminds me of like the city of Esteli, Nicaragua, where so many cigars are coming out of a relatively small area, 35 miles back and forth. So literally you can drive, and just north of this is another island that you can swim across to, Jura, which has the Jura distillery. And you can literally, it's a 45-minute drive from one end to the other. And if you look at the very bottom where the arrow says Laphroaig, Lagavulin, and Ardbeg, you could walk. If you were drunk, you could still walk from that distillery, from Laphroaig to Lagavulin and uphill up to the Ardbeg. It's amazing how close all these distilleries are in comparison of, like, you think of a country of Scotland and you think of this island. It's actually a really small place. And Beaumont's right in the center of town. So there's kind of like no man's land in between.
We talk about Beaumont as the balanced Isla whiskey. It's not that it's heavily peated. In terms of the peat, we talk about phenolics, phenols, parts per million, and you're getting upwards of 40 to 45 parts per million Laphroaig. At Beaumont, you're getting 22 parts per million. And now there's some of these other distilleries some of them are in these peat wars trying to produce the peatiest whiskey that you can. But sometimes I think it's peat for Pete's sake. The beauty of Laphroaig, the Laphroaig 10 years, the balance. It's a great example of a robust, but it's also got flavor. You get a lot of smoke at the top because that's the way we're drying the barley over the peat fires. That's that absorbed into the barley the first when we're drying it. But then you get the vanilla, the caramel notes. We use Maker's Mark bourbon barrels. And so you're getting a lot of that sweetness. And there are floral notes in Laphroaig as well. And people are like, get the hell out of here. Floral, Laphroaig. But Laphroaig can be delicate as it can be muscular and robust.
Simon, can you build upon that? Because a lot of people don't understand the relationship between Maker's Mark and Laphroaig.
Yeah, we've had a long-standing relationship with Makers because the parent company, Allied Domecq, back 14 years ago when Allied Domecq broke up and they sold off all their brands. That was when Jim Beam went from Jim Beam Brands to Beam Global, and they purchased Maker's Mark, Sauza, Courvoisier, Canadian Club, Laphroaig. They got Teachers Highland Cream blended Scotch, which is a fantastic blended Scotch if you can find it. It's a great price, and so because of that relationship, we have long been using the Makers barrels. which is a great boon to us because the quality of the casks, there's never any concern about the quality of the wood and the casks coming from makers.
So you're talking. I just want to hop in for a quick second because we're talking about different expressions having different characteristics. So I started with the Laphroaig quarter cask here, which to me has always been sort of the quintessential Laphroaig, along with the Laphroaig 10. You know, when people talk to me, you know, where do I get started? I say, if you really want sort of the if you will, the distilled character of everything Laphroaig has to offer, to me, it's always been the quarter cask and the 10. And it's just this, like you said, the smoke is up front, and then it kind of gives way to this wonderful sweetness and saltiness and sort of sea character. And then I sort of side by side hopped into a Scotch Malt Society offering, which is a little bit higher end, a little bit older. So this one is ex-sherry, 22 years old. And it's very much just a hint of smoke up front, and then you just get this sort of wonderful floral and maybe a little bit of heather in there, and it's unmistakable within the profile, but it's just brilliantly balanced. So,
John, what year is that one? The Scotch Malt Whisky Society.
So this is the 29.115. This was distilled November 1989. And then presumably bottled 22 years old after that. So what would that be? 2001? Is that right, math? Mm-hmm. And it's a refill ex-sherry, but it is definitely stepping up in strength in terms of alcohol content, because we're going from the quarter cask, which I really appreciate. The quarter cask is not at the minimum of 40. It's at 48, I believe, 48. Which is right in my wheelhouse. I love higher ABV whiskey. I find you get a lot more character. So I'm doing this progressively in terms of alcohol strength rather than age. So I'm going from 48% to 55.8. But even at 55.8, it's not particularly alcohol forward. It's still, again, that sort of wonderful island character, wonderful smoke, and there's just a lovely balance between the sweetness and the smoke and brine, and
we our distillery manager is John Campbell. He just celebrated 25 years at Laphroaig. He just had his 50th birthday last week, so half his life he's been at Laphroaig. Wow. And he comes over. He's been to Corona. We've done some events at Corona, great events. We've always get reception when John's been down. John took back with him a couple of trips ago a bottle of the 10-year from here in the United States, because everywhere else in the world it's bottled at 40%, and here in the US, for the US market, it's bottled at 43%. So he took it back to the boys at the distillery for them to try it, because they never tried the standard bottling, the US bottling, and Canadian bottling, North American, at 43%. And it's something that we have in the last, to your point with quarter cask is at 48%. Most of our bottlings these days now are at 48%. We like that strength because it really, the flavors shine at that strength. And for some folks, maybe at 55%, it may be a little bit of heat, but all of these whiskeys take water differently, and they take water differently for everybody. So it's really a matter of personal preference. When we're in the warehouses and we're sampling casks, we're nosing them. We wouldn't make it to lunch if we were actually tasting. But when it comes to actually tasting the samples from the casks, we'll add water and bring it down to 20%. That's a lot of water. But you find the depth of the spirit that way. You find all these other flavors that are deep within that whiskey that a lot of times the higher strength alcohol will mask a lot of those flavors. So it's like I said, it's it's a matter of personal preference. You only overwater your whiskey once, but all of these whiskeys, it's definitely worth experimenting. And room temperature in Scotland is 52 degrees.
Fahrenheit.
So Simon, you bring up a good topic, and that's, if you add water to the whiskey itself, and I for people that are new to drinking whiskey may feel a little bit intimidated by if they do that they're doing something wrong. Can you kind of take people through the misconception of things and when you would or when you wouldn't, what's the right amount, what's not, like kind of like a beginner's course on what the right way to do it is?
You drink it the way you like it. Don't have anybody tell you how to drink your whiskey.
Yeah.
There you go.
That is the most important thing. The problem is that and the reason it became this way, and I'd mentioned earlier on about how most of the single malts, of which 130 of them today in Scotland, but in the early 1900s, the single malt distilleries were producing for blends. There was no such thing as a single malt category back then. And then during World War II, all the distilleries shut down. Some of them stayed open to produce industrial alcohol. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
But by the end of World War II, Winston Churchill wanted to stimulate the economy. He wanted to make Britain great again. He had much bigger hands, though. So he said, let's get all the distilleries in Scotland up and running. So because of that, by the late 1950s, early 1960s, there was literally a whiskey lake in Scotland. There was so much overstock of these single malt whiskeys that the blenders didn't know what to do with it. So that was when two distilleries for the first time promoted single malt Scotch as a category. Those two distilleries, Glenlivet and Glenfiddich.
Oh.
And they really opened up the door from a marketing perspective and to consumers for the first time. Now think about this. What were the whiskeys that they had? Because at the end of World War II, they'd had all this whiskey that'd been aging through the war, and then until the late 50s, they had a lot of really old stock. So 18, 20, 25-year-old whiskeys. So they promoted single malt and these older whiskeys as more exclusive. They did not say it was better, but the general public assumed that, well, if it's older, it must be a higher number means that it must be better, which isn't necessarily true. And that's one of the things when starting off on Scotch, you find the right one for you. A 10-year Laphroaig is an amazing whiskey. A 25-year Bowmore is an amazing whiskey. It just depends on the time and to Jeff's point earlier, the type of cigar you might have. Sometimes I think that the 10-year can overwhelm a cigar. We were talking about triple, where with the introduction of sherry casks, that sweetness marries beautifully with the tobacco, the leaf. So also I would say visit your local, when they're back open again, visit your local bars that have got a good whiskey selection and sample and try and find a bartender who's got the knowledge to be able to teach you, or a friend to be able to teach you, and you can go online, you can do virtual tours of our distilleries, you can visit Laphroaig online. There's so much information available at your fingertips anymore. You can do it while you're at the bar, just Google it. But
you can visit in person, Simon, right?
Pardon?
If people make the journey, they can visit the distillery in person.
Absolutely.
Make the pilgrimage.
Yeah.
And the best way to go is to take the ferry. You can either fly. There's only two ways. You're going to fly or take the ferry. But if you take the ferry, it's incredible. It's a beautiful view. You get to see the whole island coming in and out. And
it puts you on island time. It slows you down. We fly we used to fly everywhere, not flying anywhere right now. But the flight's only 20 minutes from Glasgow if the plane could land. So you've also got a better chance of getting to the island by taking the ferry, because it's an ocean-going ferry. But a lot of times the ferries will shut down as well, because you're talking about this island out in the middle of the Atlantic, 320 days of horizontal rain. So that's why the islanders make the whiskey they make, is because it's just so damn cold and wet on the island. It's actually not that cold. You go up into the Highlands where you've got our distilleries like Ardmore and Glengarry, they get feet of snow up there. Laphroaig and on Isla, they get very little snow because you're right on the edge of the Gulf Stream. So those warmer ocean temperatures keep it much milder, which is perfect for making whiskey year round. Although you ask John Campbell, he likes the really crisp, cool days on the island because you get a different kind of style spirit. Just think about the distilleries in the U.S., the difference between makers in Kentucky and Jim Beam in Kentucky versus Stranahan's up in Colorado at a mile high. Higher elevation, drier climate, you're going to get the pressure, the barometric pressure is going to change the way the boiling temperature is harder at a higher altitude. So that's going to influence distillation, but it's also influencing maturation, the way the whiskeys are aging in the barrel.
Of course,
Can't take whiskey out of the South, man. That's our thing, man. It's just
one of the benefits, of course, Simon, being in Isla is that cooler temperature and being at sea level. We haven't really talked about this yet, but the Angels share is going to be reduced quite a bit than, say an environment like Denver where it's drier and higher altitude. And certainly, when you talk about the older whiskeys, you want to keep as much of that older whiskey in the cask as possible, but every year you're losing a little bit to the Angels. And that has to really help to offset that loss.
Yeah, and you also, you're losing on average 1.5 to 2% a year. It's upwards of 4% a year in Kentucky. We also have Crucian in St. Croix, the rum distillery. They're losing 7 to 8%. Now, we're stingy Scots. We're not going to give that up. We're not going to let go of that. But actually, because of the cooler temperatures and the damper climate, you're going to lose a lot less. And I'll show you. Go ahead. Were you going to say something there, Jeff?
I was. So, John, in my opinion, Islay is very similar to the northeastern coast of Canada.
Oh, yes.
The upper parts of Maine.
Very much so.
It just even feels in the rocky shoreline very similar.
And I would even say the lifestyle, like Simon was talking about, you learn to put your watch away and just slow things down a little bit. The concept of, well, what time is lunch? Well, when we're hungry. Well, what time are you going to be there? When we get there. And
Right.
And there's less of a concern, the sort of New York fast-paced lifestyle. That's not how people on the island live, and that's certainly not on the East Coast of Canada and the East Coast of the United States. People slow down and learn to appreciate life, perhaps in a way that maybe we could all appreciate life, especially now, a little bit better.
Right. And when you're departing someone on the island, I'll see you when I see you.
yeah.
Hey, Simon, can you touch on this part right here, that crest and the how you guys got it?
That is the Royal Warrant. We are the only distillery in Scotland that receives the Royal Warrant. It's the Royal Warrant of Prince Charles.
I'll hold that up.
It's the 3 feathers. And it says Ich dien, which means I serve, which is the Windsor family there. The Royal Warrant recognizes sustainability, contributions to the community, and craftsmanship. And it's a great source of pride for us to be the only distillery that carries the Royal Warrant of Prince Charles.
Does Prince Charles ever just show up?
Tell them the story about the airplane.
Well, he has shown up in the past. He was there for 2015 for the 200-year anniversary. He showed up earlier back in the 90s. He came for a visit, and there was a different pilot that landed on that came to Isla, but he decided that he wanted to take off from Isla and ended up skidding off the end of the runway, and he basically broke the plane. They had to.
Oh my goodness.
So they don't let him fly anymore.
I guess not.
Oh, that's epic.
Yeah.
So that little seal is a big deal, by the way. I mean, you see it like on HP sauce and things like that. So that's when you talk about like Scottish or British products that are like real nationalistic and prideful, that's actually a really big deal, especially to be only single malt to have it. I mean, that's, in my opinion, it's
So
Yeah, that is a big deal, Jeff. You're absolutely correct.
and Laphroaig itself, Laphroaig means the hollow by the bay. That OAIG ending, that it's pronounced Laphroaig, ik. Ik means bay, as in Viking. Vik means bay. And that shows you the Norse influence. There is along the eastern side of the island, along where the sound is, there's a village of Frøyk, which means bay. So the Vikings were on the Isla for about almost 400 years. We got tired of them, drove them off, and that was Somerset, the Lord of the Somerled, the Lord of the Isles, ran the island and ran that whole part of Scotland for about 300 years.
Yeah, I mean, what were they, like 880 to like early 1100s?
Yeah,
I mean, you could see the
right.
Viking, the Nordic, and the Ardbeg too. I think if you look,
Yep.
Those Vikings.
And the other
then
thing
they discovered Canada and they left.
I don't blame them, man.
Too cold. We didn't have to drive them off. They left on their own because they just couldn't stand the winter. So
They're like, this place is a nightmare. I'm out of here, man.
Well, and you were mentioning
by then the Scots wouldn't let them back in.
Yeah.
you were mentioning Eastern Canada. Certainly, Cape Breton is almost in some ways more Scottish than Scotland. There's a lot of the Scots came across during the clearances, and they settled in Cape Breton because of the familiarity of the geography of the region.
Yeah.
I want to point out as well the 1815, that date. So I mentioned earlier 1823 was the Excise Act. That was when the whiskey was legally you could get a license. So it says established 1815. It should probably read 1815, the year the taxman caught us, because the boys were making whiskey probably prior to that. 1847, Donald Johnston, one of the brothers, fell into a vat of burnt pot ale at the distillery and succumbed to his injuries. So we like to say there's a little bit of the Johnson family in every bottle of Laphroaig. That extra body.
I guess one of the downsides of being in Isla is you didn't have the benefit of being in the Highlands to evade the taxman a little bit longer, perhaps, because really all you need to do is get on a boat. You didn't have to climb the mountains and travel by horseback for 3 days to try and track these distilleries down. You could see them from quite a distance.
Yeah, you can always sink a boat, though.
Yeah, well, and you
got to find it.
Yeah, you got to find it, man. Sink the boat. That's what you
Well,
should have kept the Vikings. You should have kept the
it-
Vikings, Simon. You could have scared them off.
You could also
There's a
see the
bunch of these
taxman
rocky
coming on
islands.
his boat, so you could hide the stills.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Simon, you guys also had a
Speaking
water
of hiding,
war with Lagavulin. I was reading up on this.
Yes, Lagavulin, our neighbor, just half a mile down the road, because of the popularity of Laphroaig, it was being used for blending purposes, and the folks at Lagavulin decided that they wanted to cash in on the success. So they built a replica of our stills. They stole one of our stillmen, and in the middle of the night, they dammed up our water source from Loch Ben Nabris, which is up the hill from behind us, and redirected the Lade. A Lade is a waterway coming from a stream, and we ended up having to take them to court to get our water back, because water is really the most important, one of the most important ingredients in making the whiskey. Every distillery has its own water source, and so it's really, and we'll shut down every summer for what historically is what's called silent season. There isn't enough water to make whiskey, so the boys would go work the fields until the rains came, and then once there was enough water, they could start making whiskey again. I'll take people up to our water source on one of our hikes, one of our tours in the middle of July, and it'll be a mud flat.
Yeah. No, and because I was, when I was reading up on this, first of all, the first part, I'm not going to lie, I was a little disappointed that it was resolved in court and not, you know, with some combat. I thought that would have been, I was hoping that was where it was going to go. And then I was like, well, good for them for handling that diplomatically. But then I was watching this video with John, the distiller, and he showed some water, and it looked like even the water was influenced by the peat that you guys are getting as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The whole island is basically a bog. I mean, you
Yeah.
get the higher elevations, it's a different kind of a bog. But so everything's filtering through. It's brown peaty water. You can have a bath, and it's the color of your glass of whiskey there. But it's clean. It's a filter. It's very clean, you know.
So Simon, down here with all the rednecks, to kind of describe what a peat bog is, that's something that us hillbillies would take the big mud trucks through. It goes get stuck in it.
The Californians don't understand this, Jeff.
Well, you know how when you get stuck in some really bad mud and it really stinks?
Oh yeah.
That's like the beginning of peat later on. It's all that organic material that later just compacts and becomes, you know, if you left it long enough, becomes coal. Simon, you got a chunk of it there with you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, the largest bogs in the world are in Finland, but you get them up in northern Germany and Denmark. Ireland, 1/6 of the landmass of Ireland is turf, peat.
Yeah.
Canada's got the largest tracts of peat. The U.S., any idea where the biggest tracts of peat in the U.S. are?
Yeah, I'm gonna take a guess.
Go ahead.
North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana.
You're in the right region. It's a little too dry up there. It's Minnesota. Think the land of 10,000 lakes.
Oh, okay.
Right, because when the glaciers receded, they cut into the land, and then the water filled in, and then vegetation grows on the sides, and then eventually the vegetation takes over.
Don't encourage us to like try and make scotch in Minnesota though. Like we haven't figured it out yet as Americans. So don't give us any ideas, Simon. You got to stop talking about that right now, man.
Yeah, Jeff, you can't make scotch in Minnesota. You can make Minnesota barley whiskey, but you can't make scotch.
You can't make anything in Minnesota. So
I heard of sorry, go ahead, Simon.
No. So Jeff, so this is peat here. This is what.
Ooh.
So this is a brick of it. We and actually I'll bring up a slide here.
Hold it real close to the camera real quick, Simon.
You were about to light it. Were you going to heat your house with it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Put
sorry.
it up to the camera.
Yeah, you have to speak though, so it focuses on you.
Yep. I closed the screen. You got it. You got it there.
Hold it close, real close, so you can see it. It's like a big brown turd, if you will. It's like it's just a bunch of plant material.
Grass, plants, moss. There might be a sheep in here. Lives, dies, decomposes.
What's that smell like? Tell us.
Dude, Simon's neighbors are probably like, what the hell is going on right now?
Smells like heaven.
I'll tell you what it smells like. Have you been to a muck fire before, like during a drought where a lake got dried out?
Yeah.
And then it actually caught fire and the ground is burning? That's what it smells like.
I mean, it's rich. That's just rich earth, tons of nutrients.
Yeah, there's on Ireland there's bog cotton, there's bog myrtle, there's sphagnum moss, and historically sphagnum moss can be used if somebody's injured in battle. You can take a hunk of the moss, that dried moss, and use it as a compress, and it's going to pull out some of the toxins. It's got antiseptic properties. So when we talk about antiseptic properties in Laphroaig, some of it has to do with that sphagnum moss as well.
Isn't that what they jammed in that guy's chest in Braveheart when he snapped the arrow off and he had to stick something in there?
Yeah, they probably did.
Anybody else remember that? No?
Yeah, it'll. I mean, it's gonna help stop the bleeding as well. So that's. Simon, did you bring that back from the island?
No.
All right, so let me cut in on this. When Simon does this, when he does this in a bar, when he's doing his whiskey 101, he lights it up and everybody can smell it while it's burning. And I'm telling you, it connects in your brain instantly. Yeah. This is what you're tasting, that smokiness in your whiskey. And then you understand how that smoke got impregnated into the malted barley and makes it all the way through the whiskey. And it really it connects the dots there. It's incredible.
It's so visceral. I mean, smell, and it connects to very deep roots, and it, for me, it's about sitting around the campfire. Now, some folks feel like they're sitting in the campfire when they drink, but it's the same thing as a cigar, you know.
That's
Jeff,
my favorite whiskey.
Jeff, have you ever?
I'm on FSG.
Have you ever lit up one of your little FSG little Puritos with Laphroaig?
I have not, because generally I'm at the farm when I like those, and I don't have any whiskey at the farm. Otherwise,
I'm gonna get some because I'm curious to see how, because it's going really well with this regular FSG. I'd want to know how it is just with that Florida Sun grown tobacco.
We have to have a toast. It's time for a toast.
Oh yeah, I love this. Simon knows how to drink. I appreciate this.
And one of the things that I want to suggest is, in terms of, this goes back to just drinking whiskey when you're first starting out. The tendency you sip at the front of the mouth. Well, what you're getting at the front of the mouth is not only the sweet, which is fine, but you're also getting the heat. The alcohol sensors are in the front part of your mouth. So when we taste this, I'm going to ask you to place it more towards the middle of the tongue. It's going to bypass the heat sensors. You're going to get more of the flavor, less of the burn. Riedel does a whiskey glass that's tulip lipped, and what that's doing is depositing the spirit in the middle of the tongue rather than the front. So here's the toast. You ready?
Yep.
This is, I got quarter cask. I call this one the wild child. So here's to fighting, cheating, stealing, and drinking. If you fight, may you fight alongside my brother. If you cheat, may you cheat death. If you steal, may you steal another's heart. And if you drink, may you drink with me. Cheers.
Cheers.
Simon, there's a YouTube channel of a couple of guys called Whiskey Tribe. They end all their videos saying that. It's really neat. I love it.
It's a good toast.
June, did you drink after that toast? There you go. Come on, man.
So Simon, you do a lot of Robert Burns dinners with Laphroaig or not?
I do indeed. Robbie Burns, he's the poet laureate of Scotland. We celebrate his birthday every January 25th. The timing's perfect because you've sworn off alcohol for a New Year's resolution, and it lasts about 24 days. Like, I can't do it anymore. So Burns Night is perfect. You know him because he wrote Coming Through the Rye and Old Lang Syne. He popularized. We do a lot of Burns Night suppers, and you can do them any time of the year. You can pay tribute to Robbie any time of the year. But it's just it actually falls in a perfect time for us because things have quieted down after Christmas, and things are not really gearing up again until in terms of holidays until Valentine's Day. So end of January is a perfect time to, and it's cooler weather, so it's great whiskey weather. The time.
So are you somewhat of a haggis connoisseur?
I wouldn't say I'm a connoisseur. I'm a lover of it, but certainly had my fill of haggis through the years, whether it be haggis sliders, or we did a high-end Chinese Burns Night supper in Massachusetts one year, and there were haggis dumplings. So I mean, it's great. Haggis, it's an organ meat. It just depends on how you spice it and how you cook it. Really,
it's good.
Yeah.
So do you find that like haggis on the island of Islay is a little different than, let's say, in other parts of Scotland?
It's going to be pretty fresh on Islay. But I mean, every family has their own recipe.
What do you mean by fresh? Like a fresh stomach or something? What do you mean by fresh?
Oh, you mean what is haggis?
No.
I mean,
well, when you say it's pretty fresh, what do you? I mean, I don't know that there's a difference between a fresh haggis and an old haggis. I mean, and just a recommendation: do not buy tinned haggis. Do not buy canned haggis. Right. It is not.
is no good. But well, it just speaks to Isla itself. Isla it's a farming community. Everything is fresh on the island. It's a fishing community. Our distiller John Campbell used to be a lobster fisherman with his brother. So everything is incredibly fresh on the island. Very old school in the way foods are prepared, and the traditions are long standing, because there's been people on Isla since when the hunter-gatherers first started traveling. There's standing stones that go back to the Bronze Age. I mean, there have been people on this island for a very long time.
So did they ever like jam some seafood inside the haggis and Eiley, or no?
No,
Not gonna happen.
They do not come together. No, but seafood in Laphroaig is fantastic. Oysters in Laphroaig are delicious. And scallops as well. I mean, the scallops off Isla are amazing. They're big scallops, but they're sweet and they're tender.
Yeah, I mean, you have that buttery sweetness with the scallops that'll just complement.
There's an oyster farm on Isla called Loch Grunyert, and they are delicious Atlantic style, briny, creamy, buttery oysters that just bring out the creaminess of the whiskey, and the smoke of the whiskey also brings out the flavors of the oyster as well. I've been trying to get them across to the United States, but just a little difficult.
Bowmore does that oyster luge event at our stores.
That's correct. The oyster luge. The idea behind oyster luge is you sip the oyster brine, you sip the whiskey. The Bowmore 12 works best, and then you eat the oyster, and then you pour the remainder of your Bowmore 12 into the oyster cup, and then luge.
Oh man, Aaron's all over that one.
No,
that's brilliant.
People love it, and the presentation looks amazing. You got this big tray of oysters there. And anyway, I've never done it, but we've had it several times, and I keep missing that. But it looks delicious.
It's delicious.
You only eat oysters with months that have an R in it. September to April, man.
Unless you're in Scotland, where it's always cold.
That's true.
And only drink whiskeys that have the letter L in it.
There you go.
So speaking of which, Simon, is Laphroaig the number one selling whiskey in America from Ireland?
It is. It's the number one selling Isla single malt. We have the top 3 selling whiskeys from Isla. We've got 2 Laphroaig 10-year and quarter cask, and then the Bowmore is Bowmore 12. So the top 3 sellers.
Simon? I'm just curious. Where does Laphroaig do really, really well, just based off of this whiskey? Do you have like countries where it does really well, or is it just kind of
highest per capita consumption for us is Sweden?
Okay.
And that is because one of our distiller manager at the turn of the century, the early 1900s, Ian Hunter, decided to put Laphroaig on the map globally, and he started traveling the global market. He went to Sweden, and it's because of his early efforts in Sweden that we get a lot of Swedes coming over for the festival, and they'll come to Scotland for drinking weekends because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to buy a plane ticket, fly to Scotland to the weekend, rather than buy a cocktail in Stockholm. A cocktail in Stockholm will cost you $45 and up. So it's easier to just fly to Scotland and drink and then fly back.
That's how I feel about cigars.
But
also cigars are expensive.
Yeah, Germany does really well for us, and Spain. But
really,
North America, the most profitable market is the United States, and then it's UK, and then UK travel retail duty free.
Mm-hmm.
Well, man, I just got into this, so you guys are going to start seeing a spike.
And Seth, where are you, Seth?
I'm in North Carolina. I'm the only. I'm the Southerner. All those are Canadians and Californians.
So
Yeah.
Well, you're Florida, Jeff, but yeah, you're with me.
all right, I'm on Eastern time zone.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, so Jeff had mentioned Robbie Burns. It's a this whiskey. So, and I'm going to pour myself a little triple wood, same that your drink there, Seth. I think there's a real poetry to this whiskey, and it's a little known fact that Robbie Burns died the same time as Shakespeare. So the two of them arrived at the pearly gates, and St. Peter said, "Well, gentlemen, I'm sorry, there's only enough room for one bard in heaven, so we're going to have a bard off. I will present the topic to each of you. You each come up with your best, and whoever comes up with the best, you're into heaven. I'm going to start with you, Shakespeare, and the topic is Timbuktu." So Willie pauses, thinks for a moment, and then he stands and he delivers. "He gazed across the shifting sands. He swam across the golden lands. A clipper ship came into view. Destination, Timbuktu." St. Peter's, oh my goodness, that's just brilliant. Right off the cuff like that. That's just classic Shakespeare. "Okay, Robbie, you got your work cut out for you. Stand and deliver." So Robbie pauses, thinks for a moment, and then he stands and delivers. "Tim and I a camping went, espied 3 lassies in a tent. They were 3 and we were 2, so I bucked 1 and Timbuktu." Needless to say, if you head south, say hello to Robbie. Right? So here's the toast. Here's a Burns toast. "May the best you've ever seen be the worst you'll ever see. May a moose never leave your pantry with a teardrop in his eye. May you all be hale and hearty till you're old enough to die. I wish you all the best as I wish you all to be." Slanja, cheers.
Slanja.
Cheers. I'm loving these toasts, man. We got to keep doing these toasts. This is my speed right now.
When they try to do these Robbie Byrne dinners, I'm like, nowhere to be found. I have a hard time with Jack and Jill went up the hill. And these guys come up with this stuff, and it's also so posh.
But the Burns night, you can celebrate in the spirit of Burns, and we've done it. We've done it in Miami with Brazilian meat dishes. I mean, I've done it in we talk about Minnesota. One of the gals from Beam Suntory, her dad was a butcher, and instead of meatballs, we did peat balls.
Wow.
That were delicious, really fantastic. So, I mean, the great thing, Laphroaig, in food or cocktails, you want a nice smoky martini, just do a Laphroaig, rinse of the glass, and then dump, and then make your martini the way you normally do. Beautiful smoky martini.
The dump.
It's a great idea.
Simon, have you ever smoked any meat using that peat?
Yeah, I've actually done it with Freddie No. We've done a barbecue competition. Where we did, and I've done it down in Houston at the barbecue cook-off. There was a barbecue. They had a cooking team, a beam cooking team, and there was a beam. I think it was a beam. No, I think they may have used Booker's, and then we used Laphroaig and basted a Laphroaig. We did a peat pig, and we had a bagpiper who piped the pig for the whole time. And,
of course, I hope you guys won, man. The piper probably brought it home, man.
We killed it.
Oh yeah, man. Gosh, now I really want to smoke some ribs over some peat, man. Jeez.
I would love to try it. I think it'd turn out great.
Oh gosh, yeah, it'd be. I mean, the flavors would be fantastic.
Yeah, you don't need a lot of it. And actually, there's a gentleman from North Carolina I met. I was doing one of these Renaissance fairs, doing tastings there, and I met this Irishman, and he goes by the moniker of Sneaky Pete. Is there any other kind of Irish? But he retrofitted a gas grill, and using peat, spent the whole weekend at the festival doing these peated smoked barbecue brisket that's just fantastic. And you don't need a lot of it. A little bit goes a long way.
Sounds
So
like
where's
something
the
a North Carolinian would do.
Where's the local peat supplier here in America that has Islay peat?
Simon.
Well, nobody has. Only Isla has Isla peat, but and peat is very carefully protected as well because every inch is 100 years of decomposition. It takes a long time to cut it up out of the ground, so it's very closely protected. But the way we cut our peat on Isla, and I'll show you if you want to see.
That little cool cutter, man. It's like an L-shaped thing.
Yeah. I'll pull it up here.
Now, Simon, with this triple wood I got, there's like a little booklet that that basically says, if I fly out there, I have a small little piece of land. I mean, I can't build a house on it or anything like that. But I get to do something cool, right?
I'm gonna show you. Yes. So.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need the booze.
There we go. There you go.
I got my own waiters.
So that's that. That code there entitles you to a square foot of land at the distillery. So you come to visit your plot. We're gonna put you in the wellies, give you a flag from your country, shove you out into the field, and you go find your plot and stake your claim to your clan and your country. It's a great program. If you're geographically challenged, you can GPS it. So, but it entitles you to a square foot. Now, we've had people get engaged on their plot. We've had children conceived on the plot.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, Simon.
Sorry, Seth, you're already out of that party.
Don't think I won't. Do not think I will not reverse that just to participate.
We had
Simon, don't tempt me, man.
We had a gathering a few years ago, invited as many friends of Laphroaig to come to the island to celebrate, and 300 people showed up. 10% of the population of Isla showed up, and everybody got a pair of boots and a glass and a flag. We all marched out to the field, got photographs of them on their plot, spelled out FOL for Friends of Laphroaig people. The old group was a little rowdy for a while, looked like FUL, and that just sent the wrong message.
That's what caused the Prince's pilot to crash the airplane, probably.
But we had a gentleman from the Pacific Northwest, from Seattle, who was a lifelong friend of Laphroaig, who had passed away the year prior. And one of his wishes were that his ashes be spread on his plot. So as ambassador, I carried his ashes over, and amongst 300 friends of Laphroaig, we spread his ashes and raised a glass to his spirit. To me, that speaks to the passion that people have for this whiskey, that they'll travel the world and beyond for a dram of the finest. So we don't call it Pete anymore. We call it Larry.
That's fantastic.
Man. Smells like Larry.
Yeah, burn them up.
This is fantastic.
So, pull up another shot here because we talk about the microclimate of each of the distilleries in Scotland. We talked about that. Oh, hey, no, let's do a song.
Oh yeah, another toast?
No, we're all going to sing together.
All right, give us the lyrics.
Okay, you ready? All right, you can read this. I don't need to put it up on the full screen, right?
Right.
You ready?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, ready? Here we go. Glory,
glory, hallelujah.
This is very slow.
It's very slow.
Not that slow. The taste of Laphroaig will never fool ye.
Yeah.
It's a garbage can on fire.
The
The smell of burning tires. It reminds me of my home.
Oh, this is fantastic.
That was perfect. That was so good.
We got to do this show drinking for 6 hours.
There we go.
Right?
Then we'll do
I was
this.
gonna say,
Yeah.
a bunch of drunk Scots been out there doing that.
Oh man, conceiving babies on a peat field, peat bog. This is awesome.
It's soft and comfy.
Dirty.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop share here. Pull up this one here.
You know, just
Can
looking
you-
at that image screen of the glass, I'm like, God, that looks so good. I'm like, wait a minute, I have one in my own hand right now, man.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry. This Zoom thing is new to me.
No problem.
Do you have any Glencairn glasses, Seth? Just out of curiosity.
But anyway, what
Because
glasses?
you're pouring in a rocks glass, correct?
Yeah, man. Listen, dude.
It's probably pouring in a pint glass.
Yeah, dude. I don't drink small glasses, man. Yeah, no, I don't have any of those. I need to get some.
You should try. You should try some. It's actually really interesting to try the different sizes and shapes of glasses and see the different characteristics you get off the whiskey. It's kind of remarkable, actually. If you take your triple wood and pour it into different glasses and see what you get for flavors and aromatics.
I mean, I've tried all shapes and sizes. Not glassware and everything like that, but it's.
Hey now.
Hey now.
Hey now.
Where do I get it, Seth? Where can I get that stuff, John?
Amazon.
Jeff, you sell those? I don't want to go to Amazon. Dude, you know how, dude, I feel bad for these Amazon drivers. They're like pitching a fit because they're having to deliver because everyone's at home all the time.
That's
man.
a good question. Jeff, do you sell branded Glencairns? Just planting the seed.
You're muted, Jeff.
I was going to say, if Erin Yesser is watching this, I'll thank her personally on the show again. She got me a set of Glencairn glasses with Corona Cigar logo on it, and each glass was numbered.
Ooh.
So that when we do this single barrel tasting, we have like 4 or 5 different picks we can keep in each glass, and that's the way to taste whiskey. So
Nice.
it is a great glass. So it's, in my opinion, they're worth the money. But I'm a little cheaper than a Scotsman, and I waited until the distiller guys bought me a set.
As Simon would say, the word is thrifty. Thrifty, not cheap. Thrifty.
Yeah, cheap is right below thrifty.
That's
Thrifty
right.
is a little higher.
Appreciate the value of money.
John, what are these called again?
Glencairns.
Glencairns.
It's a design. The
there we
idea
go.
behind it kind of looks like a pistol. It also kind of looks like one of the stills. The idea is that it concentrates the nose and brings those aromatics right to the top there. A rocks glass is a little bit harder. It's a little bit wider. It doesn't allow you to really get as much of the aromatics. But
I think they're made in Scotland too.
they are indeed. Yes, they're made in. Actually made in East Kilbride, which is where most of my family lives, just outside Glasgow.
Huh.
Jeff,
Are you
where?
from Glasgow?
Most of my family is Glasgow. Yes.
Velvet gift box
Mhm.
set of 4.
Yeah, they're pretty thin glass, so I'd get them in a gift box if I were you.
Yeah, I'm gonna break them, or my kids will break them.
You could dishwasher safe too. So
you know, Simon, I love the. By the way, my 7-year-old was checking out this bottle, and she noticed like the still on the cap, and she's like, "Oh, is that a Hershey's Kiss?" I was like, "It's like a Hershey's Kiss, but tastes better."
It's Daddy's Hershey's Kiss.
It's Daddy's Hershey's Kiss.
So I brought this slide up because this shows you basically the layout, which hasn't really changed in about 100 years. The where it says Laphroaig, that's the #1 vaults there for us. There's the warehouses directly behind that. Right directly to the left of where the L of Laphroaig is John Campbell's office. That's where he works. And then you've got the U shape at the top there. There's like a car park there.
Yeah.
That U shape is the original barn buildings of the distillery from early 1900s. Then the other building that's on the shoreline, those are the malting floors, so you start there and then you move to the left. Then you've got the kilns directly next to that, and now next to that you've got your mash tuns and your fermenters, your fermentation tanks. The stills are behind. You see 4 large windows with a blue roof, not the chimney building, but to the right of that, the tall chimney building. That's the boiler is. And then up top left, right along the left edge, you'll see 4 other sets of warehouses up there. Those are the road warehouses. So you've got the number 1 vaults down by the sea, and then you've got the road warehouses up by the road. There is a difference in terms of the way the whiskeys mature between those 2 locations. By the sea, it's a much cooler, damper, plus the warehouses are stone warehouses with earthen floors. So the warehouses up by the road are taller. They'll rack them 9 high, the casks, whereas they're going to go 3 floors, only 3 high, in where it says Laphroaig there. If we want more distillery character, we're going to put our casks in the number 1 warehouse by the sea because it's cooler and damper. It's warmer and drier up by the road warehouses. So if we want more wood character, we're going to put it up there, because going from the bottom floor to the top, the 9th level, you're going to see quite a difference in terms of temperature. And so that's where we'll put the quarter casks. We'll get more wood character there. You get more distillery character, and you get a funkiness from down where number 1 warehouse. So that's where we get. John, you were talking about the 22 year of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottling that you had. These whiskeys by the sea, because of the time they're spending in these very damp, cool climate, allows us to age our whiskeys longer in these warehouses. That's why the likes of Laphroaig 25 year and 32 year, the 32 that Jeff has, it really slows things down and allows these amazing secondary and tertiary flavors to percolate. And that's what you get with Laphroaig Lore, because the majority of this whiskey is 15 year, and you start getting fruit notes, which are almost Oloroso sherry fruit notes, even though it's all bourbon casks. And then as you start moving into 20 plus years, those fruit notes start turning into tropical fruit notes. Now, we're not doing anything with the whiskey, but it's just that interaction with the wood in the climate and the environment, along with the sea, creates these amazing flavors that are unique to these distilleries on the island of Islay. You're not going to find notes like these up in the Highlands.
Now, Simon, when the wind stream comes in, does it come in from like the land, or is it coming actually through, like, right in front of y'all on the water? I mean,
it's most of the times it's coming directly kind of right up the bay.
Okay.
But it can come. It's a small island, so it can come from the north as well. But most of the times it's usually coming up from the south, from the influence of the Gulf Stream and the weather patterns that are coming from the west.
I hope that boat's still there, because that's where I'm going to take a nap when I come and visit y'all after I've had too much to drink.
Did y'all see it in the grass to the left?
Yeah, I said that little boat. That's my nap boat, Simon. Don't tell.
That's perfect.
Leave it there, man.
Simon, can you take off the share and show that wonderful bottle off to the audience for us?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
That's a beautiful picture. Gosh.
So on a day like this, you could see Ireland 35 miles away.
Oh man.
And you can
Donegal
see that
off
maybe
the west.
Donegal, yeah.
14 days out of the year, that clear, right?
Yeah. Lore. This is John Campbell's, and John Campbell gets the opportunity once. He's not doing all of the bottlings. A lot of it is done back at Springburn with our master blender, Ron Welsh. but John gets to do a number of bottlings himself. And on every bottle of Laphroaig, it says the most richly flavored of all Scotch whiskies. And somebody asked John, well, what does that mean to you? And it got him thinking about, well, what are those rich flavors? So he came up with 4 key flavors. Smoky peaty. Yeah, no shit, John. Dry, floral, and sweet. So he set out to create a bottling that would encompass those flavors, but would also pay tribute to the men and women who've been making this whiskey for the last 200 years. The Johnson brothers, Ian Hunter, a young lady by the name of Bessie Williamson who came to Islay for holiday in the 1930s, got a job at Laphroaig. Mr. Hunter recognized an innate skill and ability in her. She had a chemistry degree from University of Glasgow. So he took her under his wing, tutored her, mentored her. She eventually became managing director and ran Laphroaig until 1967.
Wow, that's really. I'm sorry. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean that's incredibly early on, especially for a woman to be running a still. I mean, running Laphroaig. That's incredible.
There are women in the history of Scotch. Elizabeth Cummings at the Cardew Distillery back in the 18th century. But women have. There are key women in the history of Scotch, and Bessie Williamson is one of them. She's the only female distillery manager in Scotland in the 20th century. And we've just paid tribute to her by doing a 25-year bottling, which is available at travel retail duty-free. So you may be able to see that. It's not available in the U.S. market, but it is available at travel retail duty-free.
I found that.
But so John used a number of different bottlings to create this bottling that captures all of those key flavors. Now, there are these big hairy beasts that run about the highlands and the islands of Scotland with horns. Do you know what we call them?
McTavishes? I'm just kidding.
Hairy cows.
What was that?
Hairy coos.
A hairy coo, exactly.
Coo.
A hairy coo. So you need to know that for this toast, or a Heelan coo. So this is John Campbell's favorite toast, and it goes like this: on yonder hill, there stood a coo. It's not there new. It must have moved. Cheers.
Cheers.
Is this your style, Simon, when you actually do the in-person tastings? Do you do a lot of this in person with everybody?
I sing, I tell jokes. Yeah, I mean, it's I like to toast a lot. It's about, and Jeff knows this because I get it when we come into Corona. It's about the social experience, and it's over a fine cigar and a nice whiskey. It's about sharing and just having a good time.
Yeah.
And
sounds like good times.
Yeah.
So if you ever
This is
in
a
your
great
town,
time.
if he's ever in your Simon travels all over the place. Not now, obviously, but
Why isn't he
whenever
traveling right now? I'm just kidding.
So whenever he's about, Simon, are you all in North America or just the U.S. or what?
Well, I got the opportunity to travel to Canada for a while until they got a Canadian Scotch ambassador. So, but I get up there once in a while.
Thanks, John.
I usually go to Victoria for the Victoria Whiskey Festival
Yeah.
in January. That one's brilliant. I love that one. And if I can ever get up to Kensington and see Andrew, I would do it in a heartbeat.
And we'd obviously love to have you. I'm sure there would be some wonderful bottles that would be opened that night.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just circling back quickly to the stills. So how long does a typical still, because we talked about, the still being a critical part of the whiskey process. How long would a typical still be in production for before you'd have to retire that still and replace it with a new still, typically?
Yeah, the stills generally, and it depends on how hard you're running the stills, but generally it's usually about 14 to 16 years. And I mean, just think of it as a glorified tea kettle. And as you're boiling, the rolling boil wears away at the copper. And
Yeah.
the copper itself is generally, it runs about the thickness of a penny, but it'll get to the point where you can literally poke your finger through it. It gets so thin. And it wears in different parts of the still, the shoulders of the boil ball, as well as the very top at the angle of the line arm, because the heat concentrates in those locations. So we'll replace those sections usually sooner than some of the other sections.
And if I'm not mistaken, because you mentioned this briefly, but you run it's not a similar number of wash stills to spirit stills. If I'm not mistaken, most distilleries run an equal number of wash stills to spirit stills. Is there a reason that Laphroaig runs an uneven number of the two?
Yeah, they usually run in pairs. Normally, you would see 6 stills at Laphroaig, 3 wash and 3 spirit. But in the 1960s, when we were doing an expansion, the plans were to put in a 4th wash still with a adjacent 4th spirit still. We ran out of money, so we only were able.
It was the '60s, man. Let it be, man.
So we did it, absolutely. So it's an interesting dilemma for us, because the larger spirit still, we've got the 1,000-gallon small spirit stills, which are the size, the legal size, the minimum legal size, and then we've got twice the size, 3,000 liters of the larger one. Produces a different style spirit. It produces a meteor style Laphroaig. So it runs faster than the small spirit stills. So our stillmen have to kind of juggle those 2 style spirits. It all ends up going into a spirit receiver and is combined eventually. But because we have an uneven set of stills, it takes a little bit more skill and a little more practice balancing those 2 different size stills out. And I have to send out a shout out, since we're talking about the stills. A very good friend of mine and one of the stillmen at Laphroaig is just retiring. 40 years at Laphroaig, and tomorrow was the day he was hired, when actually it is tomorrow for him, Alan Hislop. And his son is now a stillman at Kininvie at the William Grant Distillery. But 40 years making Laphroaig, that really says something. It's a testament to the distillery itself and the people who make these whiskeys. We've been talking about the land and the sea and but the people who make it are such a big part of the character of these whiskeys. And it really is an amazing group of distilleries, and the island itself is a very special place. And I encourage, once the borders open again, please come and visit us on Isla.
Simon, what's his name?
Alan Hislop is his name.
Let's toast
Should
to
probably
Alan.
toast to Alan.
Let's toast to Alan.
All right, so here's the toast. This is what my grandfather taught me. It goes like this: "Here's to us, nae like us, God damn," and that translates to "Here's to us. There's nobody else like us. God damn the rest." Cheers.
Cheers. So how many stills do you have? 7?
7. 3 wash, 4 spirit.
That's a holy number, man. Don't change it.
Right?
Leave it.
The magnificent 7.
It's a magnificent 7. Leave that number, man.
Hey, Simon, a quick question about the Friends of Laphroaig picture when you guys are in the field, and then the festival that's done, the Islay Festival. There's not a lot of hotels in Islay. What's like where does everybody stay, and like what's the maximum number for a festival?
Yeah, well, the island for the festival week, at this point, the last few years has trebled in size. We've gone up to 9,000 people on the island of 3,000. there are hotels. There's the B&Bs. You can camp. A lot of people do camper vans. There are people who sail in and stay on their boats. There are accommodations. The festival week itself is really the biggest challenge. But
I
the
mean, it
rest of
sounds
the,
like, I mean, if you have 3,000 people that live there, you have 9,000 visitors. It sounds like Woodstock, man. Like you're just going to be laying out in the peat bog, sleeping there. I mean, how do you do that?
I mean, Jeff, man, but remember they're giving off, you buy some, you get some land on the peat bog, and listen, I'm gonna pitch a tent on the peat bog, man. So there's a place
Seth,
to stay right there, man. So
your tent's going to be underground by the morning.
It's yeah, so will I, but it's all right.
Well, there are people who come for the day, but I always recommend, if you're coming to visit Isla, come at least for 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days.
Because some people will try and come to the island for the day and see all the distilleries and realize that they made a big mistake and really need to want to stay. Again, you get on island time, it slows you down, and you really see the island at its. And come any time of the year, really the best time to visit is off season, like April and September. The rest, during the summer months, it can be very busy. So it can be challenging just booking flights and accommodations and travel, and book your tours in advance. Do not assume that you can just show up and just walk in.
Same thing with the ferry. You got to book that way in advance too.
How often does the ferry run?
It'll run normally. It's usually approximately twice a day.
Yeah, give or take.
And they'll book some extra sailings during the height of the season.
Yeah.
But again, if the weather kicks up, it can really shut things down. It's not a problem if you're stuck on Whiskey Island. If you're trying to get to Whiskey Island and you're stuck, that's a problem.
That's when the tensions rise.
And bring your own cigars, because I don't think there's a cigar shop there.
There's not a Corona on Island? Come on, Jeff.
I didn't see one. Yeah.
Not yet.
I'm sure. Listen, just hire John. John will run the cigar shop for you on Island for you.
With 3,000 residents, I mean,
yeah,
shop would have to be quite small.
Just John can just drink Laphroaig and smoke FSGs.
The worst things in life, I think.
Right.
I wouldn't recognize you when I saw you, man.
I would have a glorious beard by the time.
Oh yeah, you would. You would. Perfect.
Simon, is there a particular meal or culinary delight that is specific to Isla?
Well, I mentioned the scallops, but certainly there's some classic Scottish dishes that Clootie dumplings. I mean, Jeff, with your family, I'm sure you've had some great Scottish dishes. But really, the seafood is the best on Isla.
I got to tell you, I never knew there was lobster in Scotland until I went to Orkney, and it was incredible. I just saw these lobster boats up there, and we went out the next day and we had a lobster dinner. But so I didn't know that there was lobsters off of Islay too. But next time I go, I'll be sure to get some lobster.
Gosh, man, the Laphroaig and lobster sounds great. L&L, man.
Right.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of restaurants there, though. I'll tell you that. I mean.
So
how do you feed everybody?
It's a challenge. It takes a while. You do not get the kind of service that you'll get typically that you would get in Orlando or in San Francisco. I'm not quite sure about North Carolina.
No, it's probably right on par with North Carolina. I mean, it's low and slow, man. I mean, it's like barbecue, man. You got to go low and slow. And listen, once you're throwing back the Laphroaig, by the time the food comes, you're like, I don't even remember ordering this, but I'm gonna eat it now. So it's just
And North Carolina's a bunch of Scots anyway.
Yeah, we're a bunch of Scotch Irish, man. That's why whiskey's just, it's in our blood. I thank my wife every day for that. So I mean, that's just what it's about.
So a guy
Seth,
walks
you
in.
know a lot of West Virginia. Go ahead.
Oh man.
I was going to say Appalachian Mountains and stuff. You know,
Oh,
there's a lot
yeah.
of Scottish people that settled there.
Oh my gosh. Listen, it's we listen, I do like a lot of habitat stuff in the Appalachians, and it's like you get up in there and you find your occasional meth lab, and then you find your own people who are still in their own corn liquor, which sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But their yards are like just completely trash and there's stuff everywhere, but they're all Scotch Irish. But I was you'll appreciate this, Simon. It's we have a lot of corn liquor, but we were doing some work for this family, and the brother of the lady's name was Fayetta, or the brother's name was James King. He gave us all this corn. He says, I want to give you all this corn. He gave us tons of corn. And we took it back to the camp, and we boiled and we made the corn for the kids, and the corn wasn't that great to eat. And then James like, did you get that corn? I said, yeah, we ate it for dinner. He's like, no, that wasn't eating corn. That's drinking corn. And I was like, well, you should have told me about that before, James. So
High sugar content.
oh yeah, I mean, he's like, let me give you some White Lightning, man. So that's what it's all about.
Well, that's Western Carolina's like the Highlands of Scotland.
Oh, it is. It totally is.
The Scots did not want to come in through Boston or New York. They came
Hell
in through
no.
the south, and
They came into the South, and they set roots.
yeah.
So, Simon, are there Neds in Eiley?
Say again?
Are there any Neds in Eiley?
No, no Neds.
Wait, what is that?
Ned?
There's Neds on the way when you're driving through Campbelltown and getting all the way south, man. All those couple little towns, man. It was like Neds are the guys. I don't know if you still have them. Do you still have them in Glasgow, Simon?
Say again. I'm sorry.
Do you still have Neds in Glasgow?
Oh yeah, there's plenty of Neds in Glasgow.
All right, describe a Ned then, Simon.
Well, there are a lot of Neds in Carolinas.
Describe this, and then I will confirm it.
Well, I mean, is it a redneck?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, come on,
redneck.
Simon. Yeah, Ned's. Yeah, gosh. Redneck. Yeah, good old boy.
But it's the city type. They'll wear all the sports gear. I don't know if they're still doing that, but anyway, you can always run across a section of Neds in Scotland. Usually, every now and then, a knife fight will break out.
Yeah,
I've to see that a few times in Glasgow.
Think train spotting.
Yeah. No, it's we call him good old boys. He's a good old boy. When they're saying something which, it really falls on like the older crowd where you're like, man, he probably shouldn't be saying that, but at this point of his life, there's no point in trying to correct him, and you can't teach a dog new tricks. So he's just a good old boy. So
So
that's
Seth,
just
a Ned is more like if they relocated to anywhere out in the woods.
yeah.
Meth lab, the trailer that's the meth lab.
Oh, the meth lab trailer boys. Yeah.
That's the Neds.
Oh yeah.
Think Deliverance, actually.
Deliverance. Yeah. That's hey, we got those. We got those. That's what it's all about.
Wow.
They're good. Listen, they're good people, man. It's snake handling churches.
I want to circle back to barley for a minute, because you mentioned that obviously back in the day, a lot of the off-season barley was going towards whiskey making. So today, with modern production and obviously huge demand for whiskey that seems to be fortunately growing every year, where does a lot of the majority share of the barley that goes to Islay? I assume it's imported. Is that correct?
Most of it is coming from off island, Aberdeenshire, northeastern Scotland. It's not all coming from Scotland though, because if we had one bad season, it would wipe out the whiskey industry. So it is coming from the UK. None of it's genetically modified. What we're looking for in our barley is alcohol yield. a ton of grain in the industry today should yield about 440 liters of spirit. And that's the key thing is alcohol yield. So that's, yeah, that, and this, there are different strains. There's Optic, there's Chalice, there's Concerto. The big one that certainly like the likes of Macallan was is Golden Promise. But a lot of those, once they start losing their efficacy, they're looking for other strains, again, for the alcohol yield.
Is there a type of barley that makes better whiskey?
Well, it's the 4-row barley. That's what we're using primarily, and they are growing barley on Islay. The challenge on Islay is that it's a very inhospitable environment to grow barley on.
It tracks the good stuff really.
Well, and the winds, it's even the winds as well, because it's hard to keep the grain on the stalk because of the winds.
Is that why there's no trees?
Well, it's because it's mostly a marshy region. You do not get a lot of trees. You go up to Jura, where Jeff was mentioning, the island next to it, and there's more trees. There's more forest on Jura than there is on Islay.
Do they have? I mean, but they probably don't have the peat bogs that you guys do.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
No, Jura. They have what's called the Paps of Jura, which are these ancient extinct volcanic mountains. So the interesting thing about Jura is the distillery is its location. It's protected by the Paps of Jura, so it doesn't get the full elements of the sea the way the flatter island of Islay.
So what do they have? They have like a valley in the middle of the island with like a protection.
No, it's actually it's a harbor.
Okay.
That's at the base of the mountains, and it's so it's protected. So Jura behaves more like a highland distillery.
Oh.
It's spirit, although they do some peated, but it's more like a highland style versus the Islay style.
That's where a lot of bird watchers go, right? Over to Jura.
Well, they do Islay as well. It's a migratory stopover for a lot of birds. People will come to Islay for whiskey and bird watching, and that's pretty much it.
I mean, because the two go hand in hand. I mean, what
That's
better
my
than
point.
watching birds than to
That's
drink?
what I'm saying. So you get these guys that are coming there to get shit faced, right? And then you get these people that are riding their bikes to watch birds.
Yeah, it's listen.
Polar opposites.
Well, Western North Carolina, man, it's craft beer and leaf peeping. So I mean, there you go.
Yeah.
So it's just Jeff. By the way, really quick, I'm now smoking the limited box press with this Laphroaig. All right, Simon, I'll send them to you. I don't know. You gotta try this triple wood, and you gotta smoke a regular FSG Toro, and then a box press of this FSG, just to see the differences. And if you don't have them, Simon, I'll send them to you. Jeff, I'm not sending them to you. You got them. June, John, and Aaron, I can hook you guys up. This is homework assignment right here.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it, Seth.
Simon, you should have a care package. So if it didn't arrive today, it'll probably be there tomorrow.
Yeah, it'll probably arrive tomorrow then.
So you have it tomorrow.
Well, we were talking about the seafood. Reminds me. So a guy walks into a bar with his pet octopus, throws the octopus up on the bar, says $100 for anybody who give my pet octopus an instrument he cannot play. Okay, so very good. So one guy at the end of the bar pulls out his trombone, throws it up on the bar. The octopus picks it up, slides it up a couple down times, cleans out the spit valve, goes into a rousing rendition When the Saints Come Marching In. Whoa. Another guy at the end of the bar pulls out his banjo, throws the banjo up onto the bar. The octopus picks it up, tunes it up, goes into a little bit of Foggy Mountain Breakdown. Cool. Bartender's watching this, goes in the back room, comes back out, throws a set of bagpipes up onto the bar. Octopus picks him up, looks at him, back down again. The owner turns and looks at him and says, what are you waiting for? Play the bloody thing. The octopus turns and looks and says, play it. If I can figure out how to get his pajamas off, I'm going to screw it.
That's a good one.
Talking a bagpipe.
All right, so I got a toast. And I'm gonna toast Jeff. I don't think you saw this, but I showed the boys this at the very top.
Right. Down to 32.
I'm guessing it doesn't
32.
suck.
So what's the difference between that and the one that you guys actually sell? So,
Yours has a label.
okay.
Yours does too, Simon. Don't put your
Yeah.
bottle down like that.
Simon,
I mean,
what's
that's
the
got a
green?
label on it. Take,
Simon's
that's a
this
North
bottle.
Carolina label if I've ever seen one right there.
That's
All right.
the one that you take home.
So I'm gonna. This is oh yeah. Here's the toast. As we start to kind of wind down, this is a Canadian toast, actually, a great
Delightful.
Canadian writer.
Ooh.
So goes like this. But there's no foe like fear and no friend like cheer, and sunshine will flash at our call. So let's crown love king and let us all sing. It's a mighty good world after all. Slanja.
Slanja.
That was a pretty.
Very nice.
Speaking of which, real quick, Simon, you guys get any like whales, and seals, or walruses, or any of that stuff laying up on the beach there? Ever?
Oh yeah, we get
That's a story.
a lot of seals. You get a lot of otters, and they've once in a while they'll get one of those mink whales. Oh my God! Sorry, I'm just enjoying this whiskey, and it just.
It was cask strength. What was the ABV of that?
It's not very high. What's the, oh, I got it right here.
Simon, this one is 46.7.
Yeah, it's a lighter style, but at 32 years. And I was mentioning that earlier. We have to be careful because if it goes below 40% ABV, we cannot sell it as a single malt. So after 30 years, the alcohol starts tailing off very quickly.
What do you have to sell it as? Can you sell it?
Well, we can marry it with another barrel to bring the strength up.
Okay.
Yeah, I've moved into the opposite character. I've moved up to 59.2. I skipped the middle one because I had a cork issue, but we've moved into the bourbon casks Laphroaig, which is a remarkably different experience than the sherry casks.
John, hold that up to the camera again. I wanted to see what it was.
I'll have to talk here to get focus, but
what is it?
So this is the not to it's still Laphroaig, unofficially, officially. So this is the Scotch Malt Society, and what they do is they go around, they buy casks from the distillery. Now, of course, because if I'm not mistaken, Simon, because it's not bottled distillery, you can't put the distillery name on it, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So they use a fancy system of codes, which doesn't take a lot of super sleuthing to figure out. But this is a Laphroaig bottle. It's a 150. That's the 150th bottling. Very popular.
And 29 denotes that they were the 29th member of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. They came in.
Yep. And this is 18 years old. So this is distilled 1995. Only one of 197 bottles. It is a refill ex-bourbon cask, and it is 59.2%. So it's a bit of a heater. But you still, I mean, I think the difference I find with the older Laphroaigs is that instead of getting that wonderful smoke up front, it maybe gets pushed a little to the finish, which is a very different experience. So the sweetness comes up front, and then you finish the smoke at the end, versus the quarter cask and the 10, where you get that wonderful smoke up front, and then the smoke kind of dissipates, and you get the sweetness to finish. It's a very different experience.
Yes, because the independent bottlers are well, they were an invaluable asset back in the early days because they were the brokers they would sell. Oh, hold on. I do not want to leave the meeting here. They're the ones who would take the casks and sell at market. And it wasn't really until the latter half of the 20th century that a lot of the distilleries started realizing, why are we selling these to these brokers when we can be bottling them ourselves at specialized bottlings? So, but there's some fantastic independent bottlers out there. Murray McDavid, Gordon MacPhail.
Gordon MacPhail,
that get individual barrels, and it really speaks to the palate of these independent bottlers. There are certain styles that they really celebrate our whiskeys, but the challenge is, if you find something you like, it's so limited, it comes and goes, and it's more fleeting.
Yeah.
For us at Laphroaig, our job is to create a more consistent product, and even that changes generationally.
So, Simon, what's the distiller exclusive that you guys have right now that would be real sought after?
You mean?
Meaning you got to go to Eiley, go to the gift shop after the tour. What do you have that's exclusive?
Well, if you do the tours, there's what's called the Distiller's Wares Tour. And we've got usually a couple of casks in the #1 vaults that you go in and you get to pull the samples out of these casks, taste them. You could even blend them and create your own blend. Or you can just pull an individual from one cask and bottle that in a bottle to go. I'm not sure what they've got in the warehouse. Well, they don't have anything right now, but it varies from season to season.
So that sounds like something new, because they didn't have that in the past. You had the stuff that you sold for the Spirit of Space, or I'm sorry, the Ivy Festival. But that sounds pretty cool that you can bottle your own single barrel whiskey.
Yep.
At the store.
Yep.
Nice.
Huh. How many bottles can you do?
All right, are we ready to wrap it up, guys?
We're done.
All right, perfect. Well, I want to thank you, Simon, and thank you, Jeff. This was a very educational and fun experience. I'd recommend anytime anyone has a chance to go to an event that Simon is attending to do so, because if it's anything like this, you'll have a fantastic time.
We do another toast before you wrap this up.
Yes, can you finish us off with the toast, Simon?
We gotta do another toast.
I need some whiskey though.
There you go.
Don't California finish this.
All right, so here's the toast. Of all the money that e'er I spent it in good company. And of all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, I've done to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit to memory how I cannot recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades that e'er I'd had, they're sorry for my going away. And of all the sweethearts that e'er I'd had, they'd wished me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I will gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all.
Cheers.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Gotcha.
Great ending.
That was great. Thank you, guys. Thank you for everybody that tuned in and watched. And we will catch you all on the next one. Thank you.
Cheers,
Thank you, Simon.